Okay, good morning. Assalamualaikum, everybody. Yes. Okay, good morning. Assalamualaikum, everybody, wherever you are. Currently, we are broadcasting live from the Faculty of Medicine and Health Sciences in Kota Semarahan in Sarawak. In Sarawak. So today we are going to talk a very heated topic, a topic which is very online right now, which is about the overcoming the vaccine, COVID-19 vaccine dilemma. So with us today, without further ado, we have Professor Dr. Andrew Q. He is currently the Professor of Public Health in the Faculty of Medicine and Health Sciences, UNIMAS. Some brief background about Professor Dr. Andrew. He obtained his MBBS from University Malaya in 1976, MPH from University Malaya in 1981, and the Doctor of Public Health in Epidemiology from Tulane University, New Orleans, USA in 1990. He is a fellow of the American College of Epidemiology. He's a member of the Academy of Medicine Malaysia and has over 40 years of experience in public health. Now, initially, he started his work as a medical officer of health, and then as the epidemiologist. Subsequently, he went up to become the Deputy Director for Public Health in Sarawak, and finally, as the State Health Director. Professor Dr. Andrew is well known internationally for his work in healthy cities and settings, and has served WHO short-term consultant on the subject. So, we have Professor Dr. Andrew has been heading two task force which is set up by the SDMC way back in April 2020, looking at ways to prevent, controlling the next wave, and real-time analysis of COVID-19 data. Okay. So recently, for all viewers out there, Dr. Andrew has been appointed as the 19-member Special Independent Committee on Emergency 2021. So what we have is actually the right man, the right person to talk about the COVID-19 vaccine dilemma. So as of today, just to refresh some information about what we have regarding the COVID-19 vaccine in Sarawak. Now, the state government, for the state of Sarawak, we are targeting to vaccinate about 2.2 million Sarawakians in over 3 phases. And as you all can see that today is going to be the first day of vaccination, but officially vaccination will be will officially be officiated tomorrow in Dewan Perpaduan in Kuching. And we will begin vaccination tomorrow, which is 27th of February. So overall, there are 7 vaccine storage centers in Sarawak and it's going to be distributed over 56 vaccination centers. So we have seen that the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine, we have received it on the 21st of February in Malaysia. And arrival of this vaccine was on last Wednesday, 24th of February, in which we received the first dose of 23,400 doses of vaccine. So as of internationally, as of February 2021, 66 vaccine candidates of various trial phases, is ongoing at the moment. There are 4 vaccines candidate trial which was terminated. And as of February 2021, there are 10 vaccines, throughout the world, which has been authorized by at least one national regulatory authority for public use. So without further ado, I would like to invite Professor Dr. Andrew to begin the discussion, to get the ball rolling. Mic over to you, Prof.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Prof. Helmi, for the introduction. It is my pleasure to start this discussion, and because it is something on everybody's mind and many people are interested in the topic, Actually, the topic have undergone a few revisions. When we thought about it first, it was COVID-19 vaccine, should I get it or not? But that seems too narrow, because in order to answer that question, you need to go back to why we need the vaccine, how it was developed, and so on. So that's why now the final version of it is how we have overcome the COVID-19 vaccine dilemma. Okay, so sorry. Yeah, so can you see my slides, Tony?
Yes, yes, very clear.
Okay, thank you. So we will start. We have I have a lot of slides, but a lot of them are just figures, and we can go through them very fast later on. And I think the faculty will also try and figure out how to put the slides online so that it can be accessed by people later on, even when the talk is over. Okay, so we talk about dilemma. So what is a dilemma? A dilemma is actually a problem with at least two solutions or possibilities, and none of them is perfect. In fact, as you can see in the cartoon picture here, this man is in a dilemma. If he gets above the wall, this gardener here, this farmer owner here will beat him up. If he doesn't, this dog will go and bite him. So basically, that's the idea of a dilemma. And in the context of what we are talking about, a dilemma will be, I will get through it from the point of view of decisions that have to be made. And none of them are perfect. So that's the idea of why it's called a dilemma. And so how do we overcome this kind of solution, or this kind of problem that we are in, this dilemma? A lot of us, like my age, would have known this book, Robert Pirsig, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, a very funny titled book. But he talked about how to overcome dilemma. So the first one, the classical approach, is you see this dilemma here, both are bad, is to choose one of them and say why the other one is not suitable and so on. But there is also another way, that you say that both of them are not suitable, and there is actually a third choice. But if you talk about Tai Chi and so on, then there are other kinds of response. You can throw sand in the bull's eyes, for example, by questioning the competence of the questioner, which people have done actually when they talk about this COVID vaccine. A lot of it is in the social media and so on. The other one is to sing the bull to sleep, he calls it, by stating that the answer to the question is beyond one's own humble powers and asking the questioner for help. In fact, I may have to resort to this as well if the questions are too tough. And finally, the third one is to refuse to answer the arena. For example, by stating that the question is unanswerable. There is no answer, and we're wasting time discussing it. Okay. So if we look at the position that we are in, of course, the immediate dilemma for people will be, how do we use it? Do I take the vaccine? But in order to do that, in order to have that answer, we need to go back to, do we need the vaccine at all? Because in the social media and so on, especially, they said, why do we need vaccine when it is not worse than the seasonal flu? Why don't we just have herd immunity, for instance, or just use the non-pharmaceutical intervention, the mask, the social distancing, or even there are cheaper medicine outside there that have been used for 40 years and have been shown to be effective. Why are we not using that? Is it because big pharmaceutical industries want to make money from it? Okay, we will go through this, but at the end of this, I think the answer will be that vaccine is needed. So once we agree that vaccine is needed, the next question to ask is, how do we do this vaccine within a very short space of time? And the next major dilemma will be, will it be safe? Will it be effective? And so on. And once it has been used, in fact, in Israel, for instance, a lot of the up to 60% of their population have been vaccinated, as well as in the UK. They have real data now. Is it safe? Is it effective? And we'll look at those later on. And then finally, in our own country, our own state, we will be asking, how do we use this vaccine? Because the logistical challenges are very, very big, because it's minus 70 and so on. So that's the framework of what we'll be doing. But first, the first dilemma is, people are saying, why bother, since COVID-19 is no worse than seasonal flu? The first thing is, when we look at this is a study in France. They look at many thousand cases, and they compare what happens now to get with what happened before the COVID-19 struck. And you can see here the proportion of children who receive intensive care support and so on for influenza as well as for COVID-19 is very, very clear. You see, in the ages that a lot more COVID-19 need intensive care. And the in-hospital mortality as well for flu, you can see that seasonal influenza, the mortality rate is very low compared to COVID-19 here. And you can see that the thing goes up, and then if you think about it, is just going up like this. The older they are, somehow the mortality is higher. And then if you look at adults, it's also quite clear that the percentage of people who receive intensive care for COVID-19 is much higher, and the deaths, the mortality is really, really different between seasonal flu and COVID-19. Okay, and if we look at the deaths per million for the European countries, they start from day one occurring in each country when the death count reaches 8. So it's normalized to starting from 8 here, and you can see the number of deaths, and usually this is the winter time, the first wave, and probably now this is the second wave again. So you can see that the deaths per million is high. But how do we know that this is not the usual kind of death in that country? And that's where the statistics of excess death come in. Because when you compare how many people died last year compared to, 2019, compare them to 2020, then in the US, there were 300,000 more deaths than in the typical year. And then in Europe, it is 300,000 excess death. So really, COVID-19 has caused more deaths than seasonal influenza. And the excess mortality compared to previous years. And so you can see that during the first wave, up to 100% more deaths compared to last time. And then somehow during the summer it gets better, and then during the winter it gets worse again. And a lot of countries now are going into the second, third, or fourth wave already. Okay, and we can see that COVID-19 really have led to more death, excess death compared to previous years. And now, in fact, the cumulative death from COVID-19 have reached about 2.4, almost 2.5 million people. Just imagine, the population of Sarawak is just over 2 million, maybe 2.4. And imagine that the whole of Sarawak population have died from COVID-19 globally. That's the equivalent amount of people who have died from it. So really, this is not an acceptable situation for us. Okay, so the answer to the first dilemma, why bother, is that COVID-19 is definitely many times worse than the seasonal influenza, just based on death alone, without looking at the economic impact, the social impacts, and so on. Okay, so now if we look at the next dilemma, people are asking, why don't we just let everyone get infected so that we can achieve population immunity? And this idea comes from the practice in chicken pox, for instance, where they have chicken pox parties and so on, and people get infected and then they recover and then they are immune. So the idea of this is called herd immunity, or what we call population immunity. It refers to a situation when enough members of the community are immune such that there is no epidemic, no outbreak, but individuals can still get the disease, but there is no outbreak. So that's what herd immunity is about. But it depends on two things. It depends on how many percent of the people need to be immune in order to achieve that level of protection at a population level. And in the case of COVID-19, based on characteristics of the virus and the transmission and so on, the famous R naught, for instance, it has been determined, estimated that 70% of the population have to get infection to achieve population immunity. And just now I mentioned about chickenpox, and it never killed more than 150 Americans in a year. So that's why they can have that kind of exposure, deliberate exposure to chickenpox. But COVID-19 is different. And in order to achieve this number, this percentage of people who get infected without a vaccine, they would have needed 200 million Americans to get infected before they reach this threshold. And so there will be over 500,000 deaths from COVID-19 by that time. If we translate that into Sarawak population, about 2.5 million, 70% of our population that needs to get infected naturally to achieve that immunity, we need to have 1.7 million people to be infected. And if we assume that among those who get infected, 1% will die, the number of deaths will be 17,300. So clearly, this is unacceptable. This is an unacceptable situation. It's not a practical situation at all. Okay. So the next thing people ask is, why bother when we can use non-pharmaceutical interventions? So what are non-pharmaceutical interventions? This is a fancy name for things that the control measures that we use that don't need pharmacy, medicine, vaccines, and so on. And we are very familiar with social distancing like this and other non-pharmaceutical intervention. You know, you visit your parents through glass and you cannot visit them and so on. So do we want to live like this forever? It's very difficult. There is I think a lot of stress, social stress, mental stress on a lot of people. And so the purpose of the non-pharmaceutical interventions, NPI for short, is to limit international spread of the virus. For instance, when we do travel restriction, and we know that when people come into Sarawak, we want them to be negative for the virus, tested negative for the virus, they will be under quarantine and so on. The other purpose is to reduce spread within national and local population. For instance, social distancing, inter-district travel, mass gathering, closure of school, and of very significance to us in Sarawak are some of the social events related to our cultures, funerals, and so on. And the other one is to reduce individual persons' risk of infection, the hand hygiene, and so on, and then to communicate risk to the public. So these are the various classes of non-pharmaceutical interventions, and they are effective. For instance, in modeling, when we do nothing, you can see this much of the critical care beds that will be needed, and then if we do various things, it will be lowered, and this is leading to the so-called flattening of the epidemic curve, so that our healthcare system and our hospitals are not do not collapse because of COVID-19. And the effectiveness of the various government interventions, for instance, research have been done, and they have found that you see that reducing small gatherings is very effective in reducing the transmission, and the closure of educational institutions, border restrictions, all the way to here actively communicate to health professionals, public transport restrictions, and so on. So they are effective. But the way to think about this is that none of them are perfect. And Dr. Ian McKay, who is a virologist in Australia, have put up that it is the way to think about this is that it's like Swiss cheese. As we know, Swiss cheese have a lot of holes in them, and when the holes align, you will get infected. But because we have many layers of protection, so we are protected from this virus here to us here, and this is a clearer picture of how various measures that we are taking, the various non-pharmaceutical intervention will protect us here, because when there are many layers of protection, even if it gets through one layer, we will be protected by other layers. And in addition to this one here, they have put vaccines here as well as one of the layers. So it is really a layered approach to protection from the SARS coronavirus. Okay, and the next thing, a lot of people are asking, why do we bother with vaccines? Because there are so many medicines there outside. They have been used for 40 years. They're cheap. They are safe. Why don't we use them? And in fact, there are many trials that have been done. You can see here the countries that are doing the trials. The US have a lot. And these are the various medicines that have been tried, from ivermectin, which is, we'll show that later on, colchicine, which is used for gout, ivermectin for parasitic things, azithromycin, the antibiotics, and hydroxychloroquine, we all know about that, and so on, and nitric oxide even, okay? And the number of registered trials by primary outcome indicators, for instance, people are looking whether these drugs reduce the viral load, whether it leads to faster clinical improvement, and so on. So there are many trials out there. We have to wait for them to finish, okay? And this is by drugs. So a lot of them were hydroxychloroquine, because in 2020, this was the hope of many people that it would work out, but in fact, it turned out to be, it didn't work out. And azithromycin and nitric oxide, and you can see the various ones here. But just a few things at this point in time, because information will change every day and every hour. So as of today, for ivermectin, this is the take-home message, okay? Interesting, there is a certainly signal to evaluate further, but in our desire to want a treatment option, let us not continue to do the same thing over and over again, as we saw with hydroxychloroquine. Because when we look at just a few patients and so on, and it's like testimonial, but when we do large trials using placebos and so on, then it turns out that in fact the drug might not have the effect when we test it on a small group of people. So the same with colchicine. There is a small trial involving, you can see here, just 72 patients, and 36 placebo, 36 colchicine, and it has shown that it can reduce mechanical ventilation. People earlier discharged from hospital, decrease in the indicator for CRP protein to show infection and so on. And so you can see the effects here. For placebo, over 12 days, the percentage of cumulative needs for oxygen remains high for those on placebo, whereas those on colchicine is reduced, and as well for percentage of cumulative hospitalization. So these are promising results, but they need to have bigger trials need to be done, okay, called CONA, and there are many trials going on. So we have to wait for the results. But there are also others who talk about high-dose zinc, ascorbic acid, and so on. And randomized trial shows that treatment with zinc, vitamin C, or using them both does not affect SARS symptoms, okay? So this shows that all of them, after thinking about all those, we need vaccine, okay? And we were lucky during this modern scientific time that the vaccine can be, that the virus can be sequenced very fast within a month of its discovery, and in order to develop vaccines, we need the whole virus in order to develop vaccines against them. And since that time, the worldwide research have focused on obtaining a vaccine, but there are major challenges involved because new technology platforms will be needed. It needs advanced genetic engineering procedures, and we need proof of clinical safety and efficacy. We will show later on that in the usual development of vaccines, this can take up to 10 years or more. And the other big challenge is the production platforms, which country can produce this very fast, and so on. And this also need to be validated by the WHO, for instance, okay? So at the outset of the disease outbreak, the barriers to vaccine design and development were the gaps in knowledge of the identity of the virus, the pathogenesis, epidemiology, and so on, because all these things are needed in order to determine, for instance, which part of the virus is the one that will trigger the body to develop an immune system. And without knowing that, it is very difficult to develop vaccines and so on, okay? So we will be talking about vaccines, but before we do that, we need to look at immunity, because the purpose of giving a vaccine is to develop immunity, and vaccination is not equal to immunity. That's why we have something called efficacy, vaccine effectiveness. It means that if it is 95% effective, that means out of those who are given, 5% will not be immune, but we don't know who in a population setting, okay? So we need to understand a little bit about immunity. We are born with innate immunity. This is a non-specific response to any infection and so on. But there is also something called acquired immunity or adaptive immunity. So these are things that we acquire as we get exposed to infections and so on. And it can be active immunity from, if you are infected naturally, then you will achieve naturally acquired immunity. The other way is we get it through vaccine, and some will be passive immunity. This is if somebody have recovered from the disease, for instance, we can collect the antibody from somebody who have recovered, and they will have some immune globulins inside there, and that can be given to patient who is suffering for it, for instance. But here we are interested in the artificially acquired one through vaccination. And I've shown here that vaccination leads to some level of immunity. So this level depends on the effectiveness of the vaccine. So that we have to remember. And that is one of the reasons why we need to have at least 70% of population to be immune, okay? And just now I mentioned about innate. This is something that we are born with. So you can see that over time with infection, this does not increase, it remains the same. Whereas the adaptive immunity is the one that will increase once we get infected during the second infection. So this is what vaccines do. It primes the body, and then once the virus come again, the immunity level will rise very high, and it will protect us from the infection and so on. So now we know that we need the vaccine. We have some idea about how it's going to work. The question now is, many people are asking, can we trust the vaccine that was developed so fast? Usually it takes many, many years, 10 years and so on. And so that's a question of people. The question to the vaccine developers, the companies and so on is, how do we speed up this vaccine development, production and distribution? So they are two sides of the same coin. And we are lucky in this case, because even before this outbreak was happening, people were already working on the mRNA mechanism, for instance, and it has been done here, especially for the BioNTech vaccine, the Pfizer BioNTech. They were already working on it. So when the the pandemic strike, they can quickly convert the whatever they were doing into developing a vaccine. Okay, so that's one of the reasons why they can do it so fast. The second one is that traditionally it goes through many phases: phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4 in sequence. Okay, and first it starts in the lab and so on, and then it takes 5 to 7 years to do clinical trials, and then later on there will be regulatory authority approval, and then once all this is done, then they will look at large scale production. Okay, but in the case of COVID-19, this work was already done before, as I mentioned here. So these preclinical things were already done, and what they do is to carry all these phases, to do these phases not in sequence, to do the phase 2 only when phase 1 is complete, the reports are written, but to do them together at the same time, overlapping. Okay, and in fact, if you read about the BioNTech company and Pfizer, even before they have proof of the vaccine working, they already have started to develop the production capacity and so on. So that's why it can be done within 10 months or within 1.5 years if you add the work that have been done before. So it's not that some shortcuts have been taken, and but it's because of the way that the things were done under the pressure. The same things were done, but they were overlapping and not in that sequence. The other thing is that usually why this happens is drug companies were looking for people to invest in the company to develop the vaccine. You cannot wait for that this time, and that's why in the US government, for instance, they started the so-called Operation Warp Speed, where it's a public-private partnership initiated by the government to facilitate, develop, manufacture, distribute the vaccine, and so on. And in fact, it started very early in April 2029 last year, almost 1 year ago. And the initial funding was 10 billion. And later on, by October, it increased to 18 billion. So these were given to pharma companies so that they can do the work without waiting for people to invest in the company and so on, which would have taken many years. And this is a big gamble, because whether it works or not, this money would have been spent on the research and so on. Okay, so like Pfizer, even though they said they declined this funding under that one, but the US government in a way helped, because they gave 1.9.5 billion contract to manufacture 10 million doses of its product if it is proven effective and so on. And for Moderna, the federal funding approaches 1 billion. So you can imagine the amount of money that is available for them to do all this work and so on. And that's why it can be done fast. The other thing is, people have been asking, if the vaccine is safe, how come the company don't want to be responsible for the adverse effects and so on? This has a very long history, because during the mid-70s, when there was an increase of focus on personal health and so on, people were concerned about vaccine safety. They sued the vaccine producers because of perceived side effects. So, and then the courts were giving damages compensation to them, even though there was no scientific evidence. So because of this, the vaccine manufacturers, a lot of them stopped producing the vaccine. And then there was a shortage of vaccine. And because of that, in the US, they passed an act, the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act. And that leads to the kind of things that we are having now, the kinds of systems. And the government said they will assume the responsibilities for the safety of the vaccine and so on. Otherwise, we will not have the vaccine. It costs a lot of money to produce. And if just one case sue the company for 1 million, then they are going to go bankrupt very soon. Okay. So that's how they can do it fast. And one of the things that helped them to do this fast is the vaccine platform. And we were lucky that now they have this vaccine platform, which is a molecular-based one. and we have the nucleic acid vaccine, the viral vector vaccine, the many types of the molecular vaccines, and so on. And theoretically, once they have developed this thing, it can be produced very fast. And these are the various types of vaccines and what kind of things that they use. The DNA, RNA, the live attenuated, the inactivated, these are the traditional vaccines, okay? And there are subunit vaccines, the viral vector, and so on. So you can, there are many things about this on the internet, for instance. But the difference between one of the big difference between the traditional vaccine and the molecular vaccine is that the production. This can be produced very fast because the RNA molecules are easier to produce. People know what the spike protein. They take a bit of it and they encase it into something to protect it, and then that's the one that they inject into the body later on. Whereas the traditional vaccine, so these are either attenuated, that means the virus is weakened or the virus is killed, but it needs production. And a lot of this production are carried out in cells or in egg, and that's why some people last time, they say that if you are allergic to eggs, then you cannot have vaccine and so on. And you need to purify them, you need to inactivate them to such an extent that they don't cause the disease, but yet they will protect you. And if that balance is not done, you either have a vaccine that can cause disease or a vaccine that is not as effective because you kill them, you weaken them too much. So those are the challenges, the pros and cons of these two vaccines. But this is a well-known one and people are very used to this, whereas this one is very new and people say that it has never been done before. Why put yourself to risk and have this vaccine inserted into you? But in fact, the mRNA vaccine is not new. The technology is not new. It is many years already. But the progress remains slow because mRNA is very unstable. And that's why, in fact, it needs to be kept at -70 or at -20. And in fact, when you take it out, you're not even supposed to shake the vial and so on because they're very unstable and they can degrade into smaller components. It is easily destroyed by the human body, and early research, when they use this vaccine, it doesn't even go into the cell because it is immediately killed in the body of the humans. So they need to protect this mRNA. And in 2005, researchers figured out how to stabilize them and package them into smaller particles and to deliver it as a vaccine. So that's what the mRNA COVID-19 vaccine is about. It's many decades of work and so on. Okay, and so it needs to be super cold. So this is a very important challenge because of its inherent stability and so on. So that's why it needs to be kept at -70. So this is a dilemma for the companies, for instance. How do we transport this so that it maintains its potency and not be degraded by when the temperature becomes too high for the vaccine, for instance. And the other thing people are concerned about was that they even suspect that Bill Gates put some microchip inside the vaccine and so on. And there are many conspiracy theories outside there. But the content of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, of course, it contains mRNA. This is the genetic material. So you have seen pictures of the virus. It is like the virus is a ball, and then on top of them there are spikes. And what they've done is take a section of the spike, and this is the mRNA that they are putting into the vaccine. But as we mentioned just now, mRNA is very unstable, and so they need to protect it. So the way to protect it is by putting them in lipids. People are familiar with lipids, you know, your cholesterol, your whatever, your triglycerides and so on. So those are the things that they use. In fact, cholesterol is here. So the role of this lipid is to protect the mRNA and provide somewhat of a greasy exterior that helps mRNA slide into the cells. Okay, and if people talk about anaphylaxis due to the vaccine, this is the component that is suspected to be the cause of that people are sensitive to this, and it's the polyethylene glycol, the PEG here, the short form of it. This component, this is the one that is suspected. It is used in food, it is used in certain medicines and so on. But and when it's used in vaccine, they think that this is the one that is causing the anaphylaxis, which is a reaction, a severe reaction to the virus. Okay, and the other things that they put inside are salts in order to balance the acidity in the body. And you can see they're very familiar: potassium chloride, sodium chloride. In fact, this is the salt that we use for cooking, for instance. And the sugar that is also put inside, sucrose. This helps to maintain its shape during freezing, because when you freeze it, crystals will form and so on. And the way to protect the RNA inside is to put them in sugar and so on. So Moderna vaccine is very similar, and the difference between the two, why Pfizer BioNTech is -70, Moderna is -20. They think that the secret is here in the lipids here, and the composition. Okay, and that makes it slightly different, because it is more stable than at -20. But now even Pfizer have shown results that at -20 their vaccine is still okay. So hopefully that will be the future. Okay, so the next thing is, we know that the platform that they're going to use is the mRNA. So how does it work? So basically, this is the cell, this is the corona of it. That's why it's called corona vaccine, coronavirus. They take this spike protein, put it into the lipid just now, as we mentioned here. These are the RNA, and then it goes into the cell. And once it's inside the cell, the body, it will open itself. The body will think that this is something that is alien to us, and then they will develop antibodies to it. And then these cells will die within 72 hours. Okay, so the people are saying that this will change our DNA and so on. In fact, it cannot. The vaccine do not, and it cannot give us the COVID-19, because it's not a live virus. It's just a small component of it, and it does not interact with our DNA anyway. It doesn't go into, and it doesn't change our DNA in any way. Okay, so now that we know what are we doing, how do we speed it up, we look at the production capacity of the various companies and so on. And this is the world population, it's 7 billion. This is how much we will need. But you can see that all the companies combined that we know of, and this is in December 2007, you can see that we cannot cover everybody. There is production capacity, under production capacity. And these are the publicly known manufacturer commitments to deliver doses, because countries already booked the vaccines and so on. And this is the estimated global capacity to produce vaccines through the end of 2021. So the end result of this is that even by the end of this year, the world will not be fully protected, and it will take probably until 2022 before travel as we know it before can be done. Okay, and even with those, countries have started booking the vaccines. And per capita commitment, you can see that Canada, it should be here per capita, 1 person, 1 vaccine. Canada have overbooked up to 4.5 times their population needs and so on. And you can see Australia, UK, Japan, European Union, US, Brazil, Indonesia, they have pre-booked a lot of the vaccines, and that leaves many of the poorer countries being unable to have vaccine. And that's where the COVAX mechanism of the World Health Organization comes in, because the WHO through COVAX also booked the vaccine, and then they will distribute it to countries that cannot afford to pre-book or pre-buy like this. So you can see the distribution of the whole vaccine capacity who have booked the most, maybe the European Union and so on. And then there is a little one here in Malaysia, 0.2% of the thing have been booked by us. Not bad actually. India 20% and so on. And this is a COVAX mechanism that I mentioned just now. Nearly 10% of the thing is reserved by this mechanism, which is coordinated by the World Health Organization for the countries that cannot pre-book and pay on their own. Okay, so on top of that pre-booking, there are countries who have done things even very, very early to make sure that they have the vaccine. And should countries invest in the vaccine? And yes, how early? You cannot imagine how early it was. Only now it has come out. For instance, this one updated in February 2007 to 2021. Singapore actually started negotiating with these companies in June last year, 8 months ago. They sealed its first deal to buy COVID-19 vaccine before any of the more than 200 vaccine candidates have even started their phase 3 clinical trials. And it's very interesting. You can read them in how Singapore picked its COVID-19 vaccine. It's like a spy kind of work, and to imagine which companies are going to be able to develop the vaccine from their past history, from the platforms that they are using, and even investing in the companies and so on. And they pay upfront. And when the vaccines don't pan out, don't work out as expected, then that money is lost. But they consider that it's worth having that kind of investment. The other country is Israel. 9 million population, they were able to secure large quantities of vaccine. And the reason they were able to do this is that they developed a deal with Pfizer, for instance. And you can see the agreement with the thing on the internet. Israel pays significantly more than the European Union for its vaccine dose. See, and Israel also retains the product liability. Okay, and the reason they were able to do this was that they said that they will provide live data on the vaccination program to the vaccine manufacturers, to Pfizer, BioNTech, and so on. And so that they can see the real effectiveness of the vaccine and so on. And because of that thing that they have, the agreement that they have, the manufacturers were committed to supplying Israel with vaccines until immunization of 95% of the population is achieved. And they started, in fact, on 20th of December for them. So these were things that happened in the backgrounds, and some of us were not aware of it. These are real international work. And the thing to do now is, how do we know that these vaccines will be safe? Which one will be considered for emergency use by the WHO, for instance? And what the WHO did in April as well was to have a target product profile called TPP. They will have something like a contract document. For instance, what are the required things that you would want this vaccine to have? And for example, this is just one part of it. Indication for use. It's going to be used in outbreak. This is the preferred one. And for active immunization of persons in the area and so on. And this is the critical or minimal value that they're going to have and so on. And one of them, in fact, for efficacy, they put a critical or minimum value as 50%. So any vaccine manufacturer whose phase 3 trial shows that is only less than 50% effective will not automatically drop out of this consideration, okay? And so on. So this is the flow chart of the emergency use listing by the WHO. The pre-emergency, the submission dates, and when the public health emergency is declared, and so on. So there are various steps that need to be taken and so on. And these are the things that need to be done during the pre-emergency even, and during the emergency itself. What are the documents that need to be submitted to the WHO so that they can be considered and so on? And even after the listing, the WHO have listed them as suitable for use, they will still need to have some follow-up. So these are the things that have gone through the vaccine before they are used by countries. And in fact, countries have their own regulatory authorities who will also do this same kind of thing. For instance, the European Union have theirs, the US, the famous US FDA. And for us in Malaysia, we have the National Pharmaceutical Regulatory Authority who do something very similar with this, okay? And so on. So these are the status of vaccines with the WHO emergency use listing and so on. And so just to show you that, I don't expect you to read this, but to show you the various phases that the various vaccines are in. And this was until February 16, 2021. So that's from the WHO. From the US FDA, because a lot of countries depend on what the US FDA does. In fact, a lot of the drugs that the world use have to pass through the US FDA authorization and so on. So part of the US FDA, before they use the emergency use authorization, is the evaluation of the chemistry. That's where the contents come in, the manufacturing. They have to make sure that the manufacturing, the factories where these vaccines are going to be produced are practicing good GCP, for instance, good pharmaceutical good practice, okay? And controls information for the vaccine and so on. And sufficient data need to be submitted to ensure quality and consistency of the vaccine products. Okay, and FDA will use record reviews, site visits, and previous compliance history before they consider the gift to the vaccine and so on. Okay, and so they say that for COVID-19 vaccine, there is when there is adequate manufacturing information to ensure its quality, consistency, then it will be considered. So this shows that it has gone through a rigorous process before the emergency use authorization. Okay, and so vaccines have been rolled out. How many people have been vaccinated in the world? This is what we call a log curve, so that we can show those with smaller values and so on. So in the world, more than 100 million, in fact, 216 million people have been vaccinated already. In the US, 65 million as of February 23rd, Israel, 7 million, nearly 8 million, Indonesia, 2 million, South Africa, 32,000, and so on. I put South Africa because of the so-called COVID variant. So you can see that 216 million people have been vaccinated in the world. And if we look at the share of people who have received at least one dose of the vaccine, Israel have vaccinated almost half of its population. And fully vaccinated, this means they have received the second dose. Israel have done more than 1/3 of their population have received the second dose. And in terms of number of people fully vaccinated, that one was just now in terms of population, but in terms of absolute numbers, the United States nearly have 20 million people already vaccinated, okay? And so on. So out of the various vaccines that were used, what are the most vaccines that were used? This is a Pfizer-BioNTech. So this is what Malaysia is using, Moderna and Sinovac. We know that it has arrived in Malaysia and so on. And so AstraZeneca, I think these are being considered by Malaysia as well. So if we look at globally, which vaccines are mostly widely used, of course, we can see there are Pfizer, BioNTech, AstraZeneca, because this one in Europe and the UK, especially Moderna and all this, you can see from the various things. And these are the leading vaccines and what platform they use, the mRNA, these are the adenovirus. This is the Russian vaccine. And the thing about this Russian vaccine is that it needs 2 doses. But the 2 doses are very different. You cannot mix them. Whereas the mRNA, the Pfizer, BioNTech, Moderna, the same one, you can give the second dose. But for the Gamaleya one, the Russian one, the first one, let's say it's in label in red, second one in blue, you cannot mix them. The first one given must be this one, followed by the second one. You cannot mix them. So that makes it it can be easily mixed up in a situation like in Sarawak, for instance. Okay, and there are various others inactivated. Mainly the Chinese ones are the inactivated vaccines. Okay, and this one is from India. Okay, BioNTech. So where are you? Where are we personally in this COVID-19 vaccine, to take or not to take? And they have done surveys online from among 8 countries, and I accessed this 2 days ago. So the vaccine supporter in the world, 66%. And if you remember that we need 70% of people to be vaccinated, then at the current rate of acceptance, we will not achieve that even if we manage to produce vaccines for everybody. But there are some who are hesitant, 12%. And some are obligated. That means they will only get it if they need proof of vaccine in order to travel, which may be what will happen in the future and so on. And then there are those that in this particular diagram they put as skeptical, but these are people who really don't want the vaccine because the COVID-19 vaccine. But this is different from among those who won't take the vaccine. The anti-vaxxer, there are about 1.5% of them. These are people who won't get any vaccine at all, and not just the COVID-19 vaccine. Whereas these are people who might get other vaccines, but not the COVID-19 vaccine. So that's why they split up into something like this. So the way to deal with this is that these people have made up their mind not to get a vaccine. And they have their reasons. There is, like we say, it's a dilemma, no right, no wrong. And it is no use to, there is no benefit in arguing about this. For those who don't agree, there is no point to say you must get, and so on. And in fact, in Malaysia, it is a voluntary one. It's not mandatory. Okay, so the thing to think about are these two. This is the hope. Those who are still not sure, and those who will only take it if it is needed. Okay, and so on. So out of the vaccinations that have been done, you remember just now 200 over million. How effective are they? And we can see that just from studies from the trials, in fact, this is not effective, it should be efficacy, because there is a difference between efficacy and effectiveness. Efficacy means that it is very under very controlled conditions. For instance, for the Pfizer BioNTech, they are very sure that it is at -70, the thing is administered properly and so on. And that's how you come up with these kinds of figures. 95%, and Moderna 94%, the Russian Sputnik vaccine, the Gamaleya, is 92%, Novavax 89%, and the Oxford AstraZeneca, and so on. And you remember just now I mentioned about the WHO TPP, the target product profile. This is 50%. This is at the borderline. So unless they produce newer data based on their trial, what they have at this point in time when this was produced, then this will not be considered by, this may not be considered by the WHO because it is at the borderline of acceptability. Okay, and you can see here another way of it, looking where they are, which phase of trials they are, which country they produce the vaccines, and the efficacy. So this is the proper term for clinical trials and so on. Okay, and they've been approved in at least one country. And of course, because this is from the US document, which one have been approved in the US, they have just Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna at the moment. But in real life, those were from clinical trials. In real life, how effective were they? For that, we need to look at Israel, because as you mentioned, as I showed you just now, they have vaccinated almost 80% of their population. 1/3 of them have received the second dose and so on. And the age group they stratify them and they prioritize the older age group and so on. So you can see that the vaccinated, the first dose, the second dose, and so on, and some are recovered from the infection, and so we need to look at how they have been doing. So what is done in Israel, we can look at the real life impact, the vaccine impact. This is at population level. How much of transmission have been reduced because of the vaccination that they have, but also on the individual level called vaccine effectiveness, the direct protective effects of the vaccine. So what Israel have found out is that at the individual level, people are protected 51% for the first dose. And this happens after 13 to 24 days in the real life setting. Okay? So this is for the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. At this point in time, we don't have the data for the second dose yet, for those with the second dose. But in terms of population transmission at the population level, the vaccination have caused the transmission to drop by 49%, okay, almost half. 36% drop in hospitalization and 29% drop in critically ill patients compared to 21 days ago, because this is the time that it takes for all this to have effect. So it takes 21 days after people complete the vaccination before you have the protection, the full protection. Okay, and so this is something to remember. The protection is almost 1 month, 3 weeks following the start of the vaccination campaign. Okay, and these are the various figures. You can see the difference after they start the vaccination and so on. And in terms of those older age group over 60 and those under 50, and you can see which age groups have greater effect. For instance, in those over 60, they have greater protection and so on. Okay, and so we look at those. And of course, you remember just now we have 200 million people have been vaccinated. When they do the trials, I forgot how many people they included in the various phases of the trials. But once you roll them out into a big population like 200 million, then you start seeing side effects. So what are the adverse reactions of the Pfizer vaccine? A lot of it is allergic reaction. At this point in time, when this is in the US, 1.8 million doses of the Pfizer vaccine have been given. The adverse events is just 0.2%. This is very, very low. Okay, and there were 175 out of these were cases of possible allergic reaction. These adverse ones include pain at the site of the injection, swelling, and a bit of fever, and so on. And when they look at these, 86% of them were non-anaphylactic, 61 not allergic, 7 are still review. The one that people worry about is anaphylaxis, because this leads to difficulty in breathing, and this is a severe allergic reaction. And if it is not managed properly, then it can lead to people choking because they cannot breathe and so on. The good thing is that 71% of these occur within the first 15 minutes of vaccination. And that's why after receiving the vaccination, you will have to be observed for at least 15 minutes at the vaccination center to make sure that you don't have the anaphylactic reaction. And of course, there are medicines that are ready at the vaccination center in case some of the people get this. Okay, and the rate of anaphylaxis at this point in time, this is from the US data, is that it's 11.1 per 1 million, okay, doses, or roughly 1 per 100,000. Okay, and when you compare this with influenza vaccine later on, we can see that it is about 10 times higher, okay, than the influenza vaccine. But a lot of those who had reaction had documented allergies or allergic reaction. And in fact, 7 of these 21 had history of previous anaphylaxis and so on. All of them recovered. There is no death from this anaphylaxis, okay? And putting these reactions into context, the rate of severe allergic reaction to the vaccine is very rare. The rate of anaphylaxis to the influenza vaccine and intravenous Penicillin is 1 per 1 million. So this one is 11 per 1 million. Okay, so it's like 10 times more. And you can see this in context because increasing frequency, the deaths, of course you have to compare it with the deaths due to COVID-19 in the US. Okay, 364, 1 in 1,000. The death from anaphylaxis from penicillin is not as much as, I mean, the rate of anaphylaxis is less compared to COVID-19, but the death is more. Okay, it's 500 to 1,000 cases per year. So far, out of the millions that have been given the COVID-19 vaccine, none of them have died from anaphylaxis. Okay, and for IV contrast, this is when you undergo some procedures in the hospital, some X-rays, or they will inject contrast into your body and so on. In fact, the reaction is more. It's 1 to 4 per 100,000. It's double of COVID-19 vaccine, and the death from this is 1 per million. Okay? So this is in context. In medicine, nothing is very, very safe. Even Panadol have side effects. So it's all a matter of balancing risk versus benefit. But in fact, some people don't accept this at all. They said, we don't want to hear the argument of more benefits compared to risk. We want it to be 100% sure. I'm afraid that if that is what people want, then it is not possible to, you will never get to hospital because in hospital, nothing is 100% sure, okay? So these are the reactions of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, and as we mentioned just now, most of it occurring in the first 15 minutes, and a lot of them they had a previous history of allergic reactions and so on. And you can see the numbers here. It's just 1, 1, 1 here, and so on from those data that were given just now. And then the non-anaphylaxis, they are slightly more, but they occur in the first 30 minutes and so on, and very few occurring in more than 1 hour. Okay, and in Moderna vaccine is slightly less. It's 2.5 case per million for the adverse reactions here, anaphylaxis, compared to 11.1 per million for the Pfizer-BioNTech, for instance. And these are very similar pictures for the Moderna vaccine in the US. So there are checklists that people have to look at, and this is from the US CDC, but Malaysia also have their own. But you can see that those in green, you can have the vaccination, and these are the ones with caution. The contraindications are here: severe allergic reactions before, and so on. Okay. So what about the side effects? And what we showed just now is when people are still there at the vaccination center, but when they go back home, what are the possible side effects? And the UK have developed this system called yellow card reporting. They report anything that after getting the vaccine, they will report anything that happened to them. And even if it is not related to the vaccine. And of course, if you fall from a ladder and so on, maybe they won't report. But you can argue that you fall because you had the vaccine. Okay, but they have this system, and they ask people to report whatever. Okay, and in the UK, at 7, when the report is out, at least 12 million people have received the vaccine. And out of these 12 million, 7.5 were the Pfizer-BioNTech, just to have a sense of what kind of vaccines they had. And 5 million were the Oxford University AstraZeneca vaccine. And this is the first dose. The second dose is almost 500,000. Okay? So there are about 17 million doses that have been given in the US. And they also have priority groups. For instance, those above 70, home care residents, and frontline healthcare workers, and so on. So the yellow card vaccine is anybody can voluntarily report any suspected adverse reaction to the vaccine. But remember that it does not necessarily mean the vaccine is the one that caused the reaction or the event. And we ask for any suspicions to be reported. even if the reporter is not sure that it was caused by the vaccine, okay, and so on. So that's the background of it. So what happens? Out of those 17 million just now who have been given the vaccine, there were 3 to 4 yellow cards per 1,000 doses. So you can imagine that this is like a side effect, 3 to 4 per 1,000. These are the ones that is not so severe, anaphylaxis and so on. And a lot of them are local reactions and so on. So injection site reaction, for instance, if you get a flu vaccine, you will get this. You might even get generalized symptoms, flu-like illness and so on, and all these things. So remember, it is 3.4, and a lot of them are minor. Once you get out of the vaccination center, that means after being observed for 15 minutes and so on. And they tend to be resolved within a day or two, and somehow they're more frequent in younger adults, maybe because their immunity is higher and so on. Because remember, this is a sign that the vaccine is triggering an immune response in your body. Okay, and so we look at those, and of course people are worried. This famous set of deaths among the elderly in Norway. On the 14th of January, the Norwegian Medicines Agency, which is like our health, Ministry of Health, 23 people died after receiving their first dose. Okay? And all those had severe underlying health conditions, all over 75 years old. And then later on, it turns out that 33 out of the 55,000 who have received the first dose of the vaccine in the country and so on. And this raised international alarm, but they investigated it. And this was on the 14th, and January 19th, the Norwegian Institute said there is no link. And the WHO also later on says that, so no evidence that the vaccine had contributed to the deaths. And to give context for this, is that in Norway, an estimated 45 people die in nursing homes every day. So it is not surprising that some who have received the vaccine, a number would have died that day. And of course, for them, they have a very low threshold for reporting adverse vaccine reaction. Even the slightest thing they will report. So these are things that we have to bear in mind. Of course, there are limits to this. They have reports about this in the BMJ, the British Medical Journal, for instance. And the reason that I mentioned British Medical Journal is that the reports are peer-reviewed. But of course, there are people who will say, I also know statistics, I study statistics. There is no way that they can say it like this. How do you know that it is not due to the vaccine and so on? But I think if you remember how to resolve the dilemma, that is one of them. I think it is not beneficial to, I mean, I cannot discuss this and say that yes or no for sure, okay? We just have to believe what we believe, whether we believe the medical journals or some other things. The other thing that people talk about is that shouldn't we worry about ADE? This is antibody-dependent enhancement, and this is made famous by dengue, because you remember the dengue vaccines in the Philippines, where a lot of children had severe dengue disease after receiving the vaccines, and in fact, number have died and they think it's as a result of the vaccination and so on. But there is a difference between coronavirus vaccine and dengue vaccine, because dengue, there are 4 well-known serotypes. Okay, and even without the vaccine, people know that if you get the first time you have dengue, first type, you have very mild disease. But if you get the second type, there is a chance that you will get a severe one. And then we call it dengue hemorrhagic fever, where you bleed into your own body, your blood becomes hemorrhagic, and you bleed all over in your own body. And this is what is antibody-dependent enhancement, because somehow the antibody that developed after the first vaccine, after the first infection with the dengue virus with one serotype, somehow makes the second infection severe, because the virus can enter the body easier, okay, and so on. Okay, so that's what people are worried about. But Halstead, for instance, who do a lot of research in dengue, he says that this is unlikely in coronavirus disease because the clinical, epidemiologic, and biological and pathological attributes of coronavirus is different from dengue, for instance. And one of the things is why it is different. Of course, for those of you who are not maybe laymen and so on, there are two types of antibodies, that kind of cells that are affected. One of them is called this macrophage, and dengue virus will affect these macrophages and so on. And these are the types that are likely to cause the antibody-dependent enhancement, because the second time you have another serotype of vaccine, for instance, it will lead to this. It will become more severe. And there is this other one, which is very similar to what COVID-19 is doing. It is less common, so that's why they think it is unlikely. In fact, out of the 200 million overdoses that have been given, none of these have happened yet. Okay, and sorry about that. Okay, so how come my...
Yeah, suddenly you jump back. You need to go forward.
Yeah, it jumped back. Sorry. Okay, never mind. Let me speed up. Sorry, yeah. I don't know what happened. It jumped back. Okay, that's we have done. Now we were here. Okay. So again, people are asking, why take the vaccine when it may be useless in a few days' time? Because now we have these variants from the UK, from South Africa, and also from Brazil that will make them not effective. In fact, this is expected from RNA viruses. When they divide and multiply, they make a lot of errors compared to DNA viruses and so on. And in fact, these so-called variants, mutations, may make the virus maybe disadvantage to the virus. Okay, but there are times when the product of that mutation becomes advantageous to the virus by various means. For instance, as shown here, this is a photo of the spike protein. This is an electron micrograph. This is a cell. And the UK variant, this is the name that is used, B1.1.7, makes it bind more tightly to this protein receptor in the body. Okay, and they even know where the changes are in this spike protein. The South African variant, it has a different number, multiple mutations in the gene that encodes the spike protein, and this make the virus being able to evade antibody response. So there are two variants. One, they have different mechanisms for being more infectious and so on. Okay, but they haven't been proved to show more severe disease, for instance. But just remember this. And right now, we don't need to worry about the effectiveness of the current vaccine against them, because that's the beauty of the mRNA vaccines, because they can easily, because this is, remember, this is the parts of these are the ones that is taken and put into that little ball of vaccine that is being produced. So they can always tweak it. They can always choose maybe this part of it to include in the future versions of the vaccine. And in fact, this is something very similar to what the flu vaccine is about, because every year you have to receive your flu vaccine, and not just that, but against the northern flu, against the southern flu, because in the winters in Australia, New Zealand are different from the winters in the northern hemisphere, for instance. Okay. And in fact, Moderna has stated that it will adjust the second and booster injection to more closely match the sequence of the African variant. And I think Moderna also has said that the current vaccine is shown to be still effective for the South African variant. So what are the long-term side effects? People are saying, this vaccine is only a few months old now, maybe given in 2 months. How do we know that there are no long-term side effects? Should we wait for 2 years, for 10 years, so that once we are sure, then only we will take the vaccine? The sad part of this dilemma is that we cannot wait that long. Okay, but the good part is that even though we don't know the long-term side effects for now, we know that the mRNA vaccines, the only way to know it is to follow them and to many years, by which time we don't know how this COVID-19 pandemic will play out. Definitely we know that it will get worse, it won't get better from what we have seen so far. Every time you try and loosen the controls, the number of cases shoot up and so on. Okay, and what we know about the long-term vaccines is that the mRNA vaccines have been studied over the past 2 decades, as we mentioned. They've shown great promise and so on, and there are benefits compared to traditional vaccines and so on. And in fact, this mRNA vaccine is not as new as we thought. In fact, from 2009, the first trial of mRNA vaccine had been given a small group of patients with prostate cancer, well tolerated, good safety profile, and there are no long-term side effects from this. This is almost like 10 years already. And in 2013, clinical trials for rabies vaccine and so on. And now there are various vaccines for HIV, Zika, and influenza, and so on. Okay. So we only know from past history that of mRNA vaccines that they don't have, those other ones that we have experience with don't have long-term side effects. And from that, we infer that COVID-19 vaccine will also have the same thing and not have any long-term side effects. Okay, so that's where we are. Okay, and so after all those things, we go to Malaysia, and of course we all have seen this photograph, and these are the various vaccines. These are from the newspapers, the Straits Times. 21st February, we know that 300,000 doses have arrived, and then in March, 182,000, and there are deals to sign with Pfizer, BioNTech, some more vaccines, China, the Sinovac, and 6.4 million. Singapore have also received the dose of Sinovac vaccines, but I think the authority there have not given approval for emergency use for it yet. Probably until they can see the efficacy data and so on. And we have also ordered 6.4 million doses from the British, Swedish, from the AstraZeneca, and their talks with Johnson & Johnson vaccine and so on. And then just yesterday, as I was finalizing my slides, we have Sinovac vaccine, 14 million doses inked through Amaniaga. It has some of it have arrived apparently. 12 million doses will be supplied to Ministry of Health, 2 million to private hospitals. But we don't know how this will be used nationally. So, because these things are evolving very, very fast. Okay. So what about in Sarawak? We have a vaccination plan. And this is the executive summary. We have 2 million people, 18 and above. The vaccine will be free to all eligible. Eligible means that those below 18 are not eligible. So anybody above 18 and above will be eligible. They have to consent to it, and they will be given to citizens as well as non-citizens. But currently only Pfizer vaccine has been approved for use in Malaysia, and it will be done in 3 phases. And we hope to finish the vaccination by August and so on. But there is a big if here, because it depends on the supply that we receive of the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine and so on. What we know for sure is that phase 1 will is starting today, tomorrow, and hopefully it will finish by the end of April. This will be for the frontliners and so on. Okay, and this is the timeline, and we can hopefully we can achieve this. But like we said, so this is phase 1, the frontliners, and then there will be the elderly and those with comorbidities, those with hypertension, diabetes, and so on. And then later on in phase 3, all the others who are above 17 years old. Okay, and you know that it needs to be stored at minus 70 degrees, and we have 8 storage centers in the state. Okay, in Kuching, Sri Aman, and from here they will be transported to various parts of the state and so on. And they have vaccination storage sites, and they have vaccination centers and so on, as shown here. And for the phase where we need to vaccinate the people, phase 2 and phase 3, the state mobilization of this one will be done through the state government and also the community, through the resident and district office, as well as community leaders, to organize people to go and get vaccines from the vaccine centers. Okay, so that's the plan, and these are the vaccine centers by the division and so on. It's a huge exercise, and many things can go wrong here. Okay, and the best that we can do is plan and hope for the best. Okay, and so on. So Sarawak's last frontier, and I think they took this in Lusong Laku maybe. On 29th of January, they had a dry run all the way from Belgium, where they bring minus 70 degrees frozen water and to Belaga clinic and see whether it managed to sustain the temperature or not. And it did manage to do that. Okay, and in Sarawak, for instance, if we apply the WHO target product profile, for instance, to the state, and so of course for us we would think that of course we need it to be effective. The stability and the storage, for instance, Pfizer is minus 70. That's why the mark is 1 out of 5, for instance, compared to Janssen and Janssen, Sinovac, Novavax, Sinopharm, and so on. So we have things like this to see, just like we try and replicate what have been done by the countries like Singapore and so on, and also our national one, and to see for ourselves what vaccine will be ideal for Sarawak, because this is the ideal version of it. Because what we have is what we get. Okay, so that's so with this I end my presentation, and I would like to thank all of you for your patience and so on. So if there are any questions, I think we can take some of them. Okay, so I give back to Helmi.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Yeah, it's very enlightening, I think, with a lot of facts which has been shared. I hope that a lot of people who are on the fence, who are still on the hesitant group, I hope that you will accept the vaccine later on as it starts to roll out. So with the current information that you are having, please share all these facts, to your family members and also to the kampong folks out there. Okay, Prof, there's a few questions that has come in. I'm going to select a few questions. Okay, there's one question from, I think, Prof. Anselm. His question is this. We know that the mortality rate of COVID-19 has a very sensitive age distribution. Although the crude mortality rate shows significant excess death as compared to other diseases, the mortality rate of those below 40 years old is very much lower. Do we have data on age-specific mortality rate? Can you comment on this?
Sorry, there are data, but That's very true, and that's why even for um, the one that I showed earlier for Israel, for instance, you show that the benefit of the, sorry, I try and go back there, are more significant in those above 80 and so on, for instance. But I cannot give you offhand the exact values here. Okay, but that is correct, and there are that kind of data in the world, of course. Okay, and you can see the effects here. Okay, for those who are at different age groups. Okay. Yeah, so I think that's all I can say for that. There are the data. It's correct that the people at higher age groups, and you can see, for instance, in Sarawak, for instance, a lot of the death during this fourth wave, a lot of them are in the older age group, and of course, a lot of them are having comorbidities and so on. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Okay. I'll go on to the next one. There's a question here asking, why are children and those below 18 years old not eligible for vaccine at the moment? I think this is from Dr. Edmund.
Okay, so if you look at population groups, the age groups, there are people who people say are the sensitive age groups and vulnerable age groups. And usually those are classified as pregnant women. It also includes maybe breastfeeding women. It includes children. It includes the elderly. Okay. In this case, the elderly is at very high risk. So that's why when they look at this and vaccines are new, the pharmaceutical companies, when they do the vaccine trials, they do them at 18 and above, because those are, children are classified arbitrarily as those below 18. So they do among adults, okay, so-called adults. And so we have safety data, we have efficacy data for people who are above 18 years old. And because we don't have safety data, we don't have efficacy data for below 16, especially for safety data, we cannot give them to those who where the clinical trials were not done, because we have no proof that no data at all to show how the vaccine will, the effects and the safety will be for those younger age groups. So that's the thing. And in fact, some of the clinical trials now are going lower. For instance, 16 to 18. Some, like the Pfizer, I think they have included those 16 to 18, but in general, a lot of them are 18 and above. So we have to wait for further development in this. Okay, so that's why it is 18 and above. Okay.
All right, Prof. Okay, thank you. Okay. There's another question. With the so when if the vaccine is not equal to 100 free of infection, so what if even after vaccination, are people who are willing, who is going to come into Sarawak, are they still going to be subjected to PCR and also quarantine order?
Again, can you...
With the vaccine. So after vaccination, right? After vaccination is not 100% protective in a way, but we still need to, send people for quarantine order and also doing for PCR testing for those travelers coming in. Do we need still to follow all the SOP, wearing of masks, washing of hands, social distancing, and probably follow the travel bubble, etc. After the completion of the vaccination program?
I wish we are at that point in time now where we have at least 70% of our people vaccinated, but we are not there yet. So this is a future question. And this is something that we have to consider. But remember just now that the vaccine is like a Swiss cheese. It's one of the layers of control. Specifically regarding whether we will require people to be, to still have the PCR test, whether they have antibodies. In fact, in China, they are requiring people to have two things now. The first one is whether to make sure that they are negative on PCR. The second one is they want to have antibodies also negative. So in fact, there may be still this kind of protective layers that may be done later on. We have to see how the pandemic plays in other parts of the world as well, because as we know, as long as some parts of the world are still having the vaccine, still having the outbreak, the pandemic, there is always a chance that it will come back to us, because we can never achieve, first thing, enough people to be vaccinated, and among those vaccinated that they are protected and so on. But I cannot answer for the future, which is at least in a year's time, that particular situation, but it's good for us to think about. I suspect that we may need some form of control in future, but I don't know what form that is. And people are comparing this to safety belts in the car, for instance. Safety belts are not 100% effective. And in fact, they may cause harm also, because some of them have exploded and they've killed some people, and the seat belts have to be recalled. But still we use it. And in fact, other parts of the car also have to be modified to protect against accidents. And for instance, the crumple zone in the front, the roll bars, many other things. So everything combined together will give better protection. And I think that's the way to do the vaccine, to view the vaccine. Okay.
Right. Okay, Prof. There's some question from primary care workers working at the clinic. So they are asking, this is related to one question that I wish to ask as well. How are the vaccines going to be transported and also stored at the level of the clinic kesihatan level in the interior, in the far clinic kesihatan which are very far from the main town in Sarawak? Because there is a risk that risk of pockets of places which might be which might not receive or be deprived of the vaccine because of our land, how our geographical area is. So how are these going to be transported, and in the kesihatan level, especially in the phase 2 and phase 3? And what are the strategies which has been in place, in order to cater for this, to cater for the differences in the landmass in Sarawak?
Yeah, in fact, my colleague in the health department will be in a better position to answer that. But as we know that the vaccines are transported all the way from the manufacturing country in special transport, and they are stored in these ultra low temperature fridges, and they can be stored here up to 6 months at -70, and then from there they will be transported to other sites using a transport box that is enclosed in that contains dry ice and so on, and it's a big box, and that's the way that it will be transported to those places. And we are not doing this, the approach to vaccinating people with this vaccine is different from with the childhood vaccine. With the childhood vaccine, the children vaccine, we can go anywhere, we can bring them in boats, we can bring them in helicopters, and we can vaccinate people even in the rural areas. For this one, because of I'm talking about the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine because of the sensitivity of the fragility of the vaccine and so on. Then the people have to be mobilized to go to these various vaccination centers, and this is where the state mechanism for doing these things will be has been planned, and people are going to go to these centers instead of the vaccines going to the people. So this is a very big logistic problem for us, because it's not just one dose, so it is going to be 2 doses. And how do we know that people who have received the first dose will come for the second dose? A lot of record keeping have to be done, a lot of tracking have to be done, and so on. So I cannot give the details here, but these are things that have been planned by the State Disaster Management Committee, for instance. Yeah.
I think so. I think that this has been thought about, and I think that the top loader and also the smaller containers to carry the vaccine is already been thought of. And I think that I think through the exercise that we had that day, actually we might find the gap where we need to overcome it. And I think that it can be yes. I think that the vaccine can arrive at the clinical certain level where the cold chain is not broken. Yeah. Okay. Prof, there's a few more questions which is a bit slightly more clinical. Okay, there's one question I think from is there any data or study? I mean, this about concerning about the safety and also the people who are going to receive the vaccine. Are those people who are pregnant and breastfeeding women? Can they be given the vaccine? Is there any data to support this or not?
I'm not sure whether there is data or not at the moment, because what happens with at the WHO at international level as well as the US CDC is that their current stand is that those who are pregnant and those who are breastfeeding, it is not a contraindication to receive the vaccine. Okay, but they leave it to countries and the respective authorities in those countries. For instance, maybe the gynecologists and group and so on, to decide in the particular country whether those who are pregnant should receive the vaccine or not, and so on. And I would say that this is one of the dilemmas that each country have to make. So for us in Malaysia, if I'm not mistaken, the current guidelines, I think as of 2 days ago, is still that pregnant women and women who are breastfeeding would not be recommended to have the vaccine yet. But this can change, because as I mentioned, these things change every day with new information and so on, and new evidence. I hope I am correct in this, because I am not privy to the information that is, the decision done by at national as well as at the national level, basically, because we follow the national guidelines, the national advice.
Right. I think should be, yeah. Okay. I think that's a fair answer. Okay. There's a few more questions more. I think this is quite an interesting one. Now, with the coming of the Sinovac vaccine, which we have, Pramaniaga have already signed yesterday. Now, someone is asking can one person receive a different type of vaccination in the first dose and a different one in the second dose? In case there's the risk of second dose not being, you can't get the same vaccine as in the first dose.
If we depend on data, of course, at this point in time, this is not advisable because we don't have. We know for sure the Russian one, as I mentioned just now, the first and second dose must be different. That's within the particular vaccine platform, but with different platform, I think it is not advisable because you know the Moderna one and the Pfizer one, for instance, that use the RNA, and usually the Sinovac one and those from China mainly, they're using the inactivated or attenuated kind of vaccine. So my answer at this point in time is that it is not advisable to mix the vaccine for the 2 doses. But as I said, these things change, and based on evidence from all over the world, it may change later. But at this point in time, I think it is not advisable.
All right. Okay. All right. Thank you, Prof. I think there are 5 or 6 questions which are asking about the who can receive and who cannot receive the vaccine. Okay, of course, those who have previously, you have previous history of allergies to any parts of the vaccine, you have to declare it to the doctor. Okay, if you have any other concerning medical condition, you need to also inform the healthcare provider in charge. For example, if you have cancers or you are a TB survivor, you're on hormone replacement therapy, please proceed to declare your health information to the doctors so they can decide for you. Okay. All right. Prof, there's one question. What are the strategies that the government or probably SDMC have in order to counter those who keep on focusing on the negative side of COVID vaccine at the media, which involve the twisting of pseudoscience, focusing on the side effect, misleading the public at the moment. Sometimes I think that there are also mainstream media, who might have put up a very a negative light onto the topic when they publish news in a news portal. So what are the strategies that that Sarawak government or the government itself has employed in order to counter back those media or outlet which focus on the negative side of the COVID-19 vaccine?
I think this is part of the new norm for COVID-19, because we have so much social media and we can share multiple times without checking whether these things are the things that we share are correct or not. It's so easy to forward things and so on, and some of them are very, very old. For instance, even until a few weeks ago, we still receive videos of the Prime Minister of Singapore, for instance, saying that you don't need to use a vaccine and so on, when that was in 2001, for instance, in January, 2020. And those things are still going on, and there is no date for these kinds of things. And of course, people who share, some of them are innocently forwarding things, but some are actively giving disinformation. It's not misinformation, but disinformation. So this is going to be the new normal, and I think it's a challenge for everyone to determine whether this is correct or not correct. And people will put a doctor in Harvard Medical School or Harvard University saying this and this and this, and they may put the correct name, but if you check, the university never said that, the doctor never said that, and in fact they are correct in saying that the doctor is an immunologist and so on. And of course there are some, they truly say it. For instance, like I forgot the name of the doctor in the US, the lady doctor who who joined in um, the assault, so-called, to Capitol Hill in Washington D.C., for instance. So there are people who genuinely believe in what they say. For instance, like those people, and they all have qualifications, more qualified than me. For instance, they will say they are infectious disease specialists. They have been working in A&E for so long. They are members of the board and so on. So it's very difficult. And this happens not just with COVID-19. For instance, even with cholesterol and so on. But the thing is, one of the things that my friends, colleagues say is that for every one of things like this, there are hundreds of other things that say the opposite. But because the opposite one, the one that is accepted by mainstream, is not interesting, they are not circulated as much as the controversial ones. So that is the background. And how do the state want to do this? And the stand of the State Disaster Management Committee is that they want the scientists and the technical people to talk on these things. For instance, we have TV Malaysia Sarawak and other things, and also through social media and so on. So that's what I can say. It's a big, I wouldn't say it's a battle, but there is like a swing balance there. On one side are all the negative ones. On the other side, the so-called positive ones, for and against, and some are in between. It's a whole spectrum. It's very difficult to deal with this, and people who are giving the negative point of view are saying that they have a right to say it, and in fact they have a right to question the prevailing views and so on. So I think at the end of the day, I think it's up to us as individuals to try and figure out and maybe ask for some advice from people we trust, whether this is the correct view or not. I think that's all I can say at this point in time.
All right. Okay. All right, Prof. There's okay. I think at the moment there's no further. I just like to read. Okay, comments that come from the YouTube. Okay. Darin Azri mentioned about proper guidelines, awareness, information on vaccine should be shared to all, as more info are very limited, thus less understanding from people, especially isolated area, indigenous community. Yeah. I think this is about the guidelines, the awareness, information of vaccines in the rural area. Is there anything which is being done for this, Prof?
I think some of the, for instance, I know that that for the Iban and the Bidayu one, they have done something on social media through WhatsApp and other things to inform about the vaccines and about what to do for if you have symptoms that you suspect of having COVID-19. That's all I know. And then, of course, through the radio and through the TV. So they've done some things on this. But of course, it's very difficult to penetrate the whole of Sarawak because print media is out of the question. So I think we still depend on radio, but I think the phone they have quite good penetration now. And so they are going through various ways of getting this message through.
Okay. All right. I think I'll stop receiving any more questions. If you have any question pertaining to the vaccine, please bear with the information of this vaccine, who is supposed to receive the vaccine, who are not supposed to receive the vaccine, from official authoritative outlets like the Ministry of Health or the State Health Department, social media outlets. Can you please, you may get your information from there. So probably have about 5 more minutes. Can you sum up by giving just the key points, the content of your talk, your final advice regarding the vaccine, COVID-19 vaccine dilemma that we have at the moment? Then we'll wrap up after that.
Okay, so I would say that this COVID-19 pandemic has brought the world to a standstill, and the economic impact of it is much worse than immediately after even the Second World War. Okay, when factories and countries were at a complete standstill. And in terms of global health, for instance, as measured by the vaccination rate, it has brought the world 25 years back in just 25 weeks. In the first half of last year, the vaccination level at global level for children is back to what it was 25 years ago. And we have seen the number of deaths in the millions, 2.4 million, total number of cases, more than 100 million. And we have asked ourselves, we have done many things. We have tried and controlled this through various means, through the non-pharmaceutical interventions, various lockdowns, and many countries cannot do what China is doing because of our system of government and so on, and people are unwilling or don't have the resources to do what China do, to have a complete lockdown. And for maybe for 9 cases, you test millions of people. We just don't have that kind of resources. And so there is promise of newer drugs, but we cannot wait for those. And because of these things, vaccine is needed. And because of the speed of the need for the vaccine, then the molecular platforms are more useful because you can produce them fast. You don't need to have factories that will culture these viruses that you can weaken and so on to use for the vaccine and other things. And because of the process of the way that they have overlapped the process as well as to funding from governments, they have managed to produce a vaccine and gone through the usual trials, the safety and efficacy and so on to produce a vaccine. And the proof of the vaccine is that after so many millions have been done, have been given, it has shown to have relatively mild side effects, and even those with anaphylaxis, it's like 11 in a million. And it has shown in Israel, for instance, that has reduced the transmission, it has reduced the hospitalization, and it has reduced the deaths. Okay, and so of course this vaccine is new, and the whole world have to go together with this. We have to have the vaccine, but we will continue to monitor the side effects and so on. And the difficulties now, of course, is that it is at -70, but hopefully that can be reduced with future versions of the vaccines and so on. And the good thing is that with mRNA vaccines, we can cope with any new variants and so on in future. So I think we also have shown that in Sarawak, to the extent that we know it is working. Of course, the proof of it will be when we start rolling it out. The major setback will be the promise of how much vaccine we are going to get and so on, and nobody really knows the answer. We have agreements going on with the companies, but until the vaccine comes, we are not sure. So at this point in time, I would say that what we have is what we get, and we need to use that. And remember that it is like the Swiss cheese model, all the layers will contribute our protection. And for the individual dilemma, should we get it or not? If you don't fit the criteria of having, for instance, severe anaphylaxis before, then I would say that evidence up to now shows that it is safe to get. And hopefully when we achieve the 70% immunity, vaccination level, we will be immune and we can slowly loosen the other control measures that we have. And I think I would say that we wish good luck to the Sarawak vaccination rollout plan, because and everybody need to cooperate with this. Okay, that's all. So with that, I thank you, Rami.
Okay, thank you, Prof. So there are some more questions in the chat box of the YouTube platform and also the Facebook platform. So I'll try to accumulate all these questions and I'll pass it to Prof. Andrew later on. But we have come to the end of our time. Now it's already 11:32. So we'll try to answer it in the chat box. Okay. So all right. So all the best to everyone in Sarawak with the rollout of the vaccine that we are starting today, this afternoon actually also. We hope that everyone will receive the vaccine, and with that, we will stop the transmission of the COVID-19 in Sarawak very, very soon, and also in Malaysia overall. All right. I would like to say again, thank you to Prof. Dr. Andrew for coming into this session today for this live talk today, and I would like to say also thank you to the technical team who is helping to set up this whole live talk, and to everyone, to all the listeners and out there, stay safe and make sure that while waiting for the vaccine, keep to the SOPs which has been a norm at the moment. Okay, right. Thank you all and have a blessed Friday. Okay, bye bye.
Okay, thank you.